Hello, everyone. It's author R. Weir, Randy, as those who know me well call me. And I have a fun guest on tonight that I met at BoucherCon earlier this year. But I just wanted to make a quick uh, talk about my latest book, Murder by 100 Cuts. Sure to check it out. Latest dealing with my the Front Range Butcher was one of the previous novel, and he was his trial, and hopefully you'll check it out along with all the other Jarvis Mann books, and then the what was it? I was going to cover here. Oh yeah, I did an event, the Mac, in Westminster, which was fun. Had a lot of readers showing up buying books. Here's a few of the people who were buying from Divine Devil series. These folks were buying several books, the whole Divine Devil series as well. And then I had someone buy the whole Jarvis series. So those are always fun. I always enjoy doing it. And when the show's over, I'll talk about the event I'm doing next weekend, which be busy. But no more talking here for me. I'm going to bring on my guest tonight, and I'm thrilled to have him. It's Reed Farrel Colemen. Hi, Reed. How you doing?
How you doing, Randy? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. So you're in a room full of books. Imagine that.
These are all my books, actually.
You have written a lot of books.
I have. Yes. This is how many I've sold. No, yeah, I've written 30. I think I've published 32 novels.
And that's over how many years?
My first novel was published in 1991.
That's not too bad. So what, 30 some years?
About
a novel a year.
Yeah, about one a year.
Yeah. It's always fun to churn out new ideas all the time, as long as it keep the brain going and stuff. So tell us a little about yourself, Reed. You're a fairly well-known author, but people might not know where you're from.
I'm from the Coney Island section of Brooklyn. Let's see. It's always hard when people ask you about yourself. How's this? I will do the bio from Rote. That's on my books. Called a hard-boiled poet by NPR's Maureen Corrigan and the noir poet laureate in the Huffington Post. Reed Farrel Colemen is the New York Times-bestselling author of 31 novels, including 6 in Robert B. Parker's Jesse Stone series. Reed is a 4-time recipient of the Shamus Award for Best Private Eye Novel of the Year and a 4-time Edgar nominee in 3 different categories. He's also won the Scribe, Audie, Macavity, Barry, and Anthony Awards. He is a former executive vice president of Mystery Writers of America, a former adjunct instructor at Hofstra University. His latest novel, Blind to Midnight, was released last August. He lives with his wife and their 4 cats on Long Island, New York.
Wow. So are any of the cats going to make appearances tonight? Sometimes they like to
jump in. I don't let them in my office for good reason. Yes. And it's my wife is the cat person. I mean, I love them, but my wife is the cat person.
Yeah, because I used to have a cat. It would lay across my lap and sometimes lay on the keyboard to get your attention. Didn't want to.
Well, I would if they would do that, I would help. I would appreciate the help.
Next great American novel written by your cats, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Your publisher. You don't tell your publisher though, right? Yes. That they helped write.
Meow by 100 Cuts. Yes.
So you Coney Island. So I was looking over your website and stuff, and you have some really interesting YouTube videos. You did a little mini movie there about Coney Island and where you got a lot of your inspiration growing up, and you told a story there that I thought was really interesting about when you were like 15, 16 years old. You worked at
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, and you heard a shot, and you actually ran towards it, and I'm like, most people would run away from the sound. Yes. So
I was a stupid 15-year-old kid, and I heard a gunshot. And don't ask me how I knew it was a gunshot, right? I just knew it wasn't a car backfiring. And of course I'd heard fireworks and it didn't sound like a firework. And like a dummy, I ran towards it. And unfortunately, running towards it, I saw a gentleman fall into the street. He'd just been shot and robbed. And I stood there and watched him die of a gunshot wound, which, if you're going to be a crime writer, in the back of my mind, I've always felt that incident has in some ways pushed me towards the career I've had.
Yeah, that would definitely affect you seeing something like that. It's just interesting that you always see in the TV shows and stuff, when there's shooting going on, everyone's running in all different crazy directions and stuff, and you went right towards it. It's almost as if it was preordained for you to go there for that reason. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm not a big believer in predestination or being preordained, but I just 15-year now, if I heard a gunshot, you would watch me set the world record in the other direction. But as a 15-year-old, 15-year-olds, we only think as 15-year-olds we know everything.
Yeah.
The thing I've learned as I've grown older is the older you get, the more you understand, the less you know. And as a 15-year-old, I thought I was bulletproof. It's why young men fight wars, because they think they're indestructible. And so I ran towards this, and it happened to be that a gentleman from the local Ford dealership had picked up the bank, the payroll. And as he came out of the post office, somebody walked right up to him, stuck a gun in his belly, shot him, and stole the money. And it's still unsolved.
Cold case today, right?
And in fact, the novel I'm working on now is based on that, what I saw at 15.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I've never really written a fictionalized version of it. I've written an essay about it, but I've never, a nonfiction essay, but I've never really used it as material for my work.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I also saw on your website you used to write poetry.
I started
out. Do you still write poetry?
Yeah, I actually last week I posted on Facebook a poem I wrote while I was in Spain. Yeah. I don't write it as much or as frequently, but I still every now and then will squeeze one out. Yeah, squeeze a poem out. I started as a poet because when I was a kid, I grew up in a very loving but very angry household. And when everybody's screaming at each other, no one hears anything. And I think I started writing poetry as a way to be heard.
Yeah.
And look where it went. Look where I wound up. I'm on your show, man.
Well, and when I was a teenager, I did the same thing. I used to write poetry. Some of them kind of almost like song lyrics too. But but that was how I dealt with my teenage angst. My issues in my life was I put those on pieces of paper. So that was my way of yelling at the world and yelling at people. But I would just write it on paper instead of yelling it out loud.
Yeah, it's an effective. 12 and 13-year-old, 14-year-old poetry is a good way to express yourself when you don't feel anybody else is listening to you. And it is a way to be heard. And I was published by the time I was 15. My poetry was published. So, I knew I could write, but it certainly took a while for me to go from poetry to prose.
Yeah. Well, it's there's similarities, but obviously they're different. You're kind of capsuling everything in a very short piece of work, whereas a book, you have obviously a much larger storyline to tell and many more characters involved and all that. So, but yeah, I thought that was interesting. So you said Coney Island. So Coney Island, and when I was watching your YouTube videos, you were talking about your Mo Prager series and how that really, you used a lot of that, your experiences in growing up there in that series.
Well, if you can't write if I've always said, if you can't write a noir or hardboiled series set with the background of an amusement park, you can't write one. Yeah, and Coney Island is an interesting place because I don't know if your viewers know this. At one point in the 1890s, it was one of the most popular travel destinations in the world. There were 5 different amusement parks: Steeplechase, Luna Park, Dreamland, Seal Park, all sorts of different parks with different themes. And then by the time I was born, Coney Island was a decaying, basically deserted, somewhat crime-ridden place of once was and what used to be. And that's an interest. If you can't write novels like crime novels, having grown up there, you can't write crime novels. So it was an interesting place to grow up.
Yeah. And Coney Island obviously is nothing like it was when you were growing up. It's changed immensely, right? It's, you were talking about some of the really ugly buildings that they put up there, little boxes. You said almost looked like from Russia.
Right. They're Warsaw Pact chic. Those buildings are still there. And it's always, of course, what's amazing is there's a housing project there called Luna Park. Now, Luna Park was one of the amusement parks in the original Coney Island, and it reportedly had 400,000 incandescent light bulbs surrounding the park. Okay, it burned down a few times, by the way, Luna Park, and Luna Park has been replaced by really ugly apartment buildings.
Yeah.
Really ugly apartment buildings. But they still call it Luna Park.
So those considered like low-income housing too, or they're just lousy?
I would say middle. They're kind of middle-income housing projects. Yeah, and are they ugly? So of course, in the place that used to be the coolest place in Coney Island, now just these ugly apartment buildings,
taking up the background and stuff. So you wrote poetry as a teenager, and when did you get the idea? I want to be a crime novelist. So when did that really strike to hit you? And you said, I think this is something I want to do. I mean, I'm sure you had a regular job. You worked at Baskin Robbins at 15, but
yes,
obviously,
yeah, I've been working since I was 13. Go to school and have a job. I can tell you very specifically how I became a crime writer. And the funny thing of this is, I never read crime novels. It wasn't my thing. To me, crime novels were those cheesy books on my dad's nightstands with the lurid covers of half-naked women holding guns. Really, I never thought much of crime novels. And what happened was, I was working at the cargo area at Kennedy Airport when I got out of college. I was working there. I worked there for 5 years. And if you know about the Lufthansa heist, that's where the Lufthansa heist happened. It was kind of like the Wild West. If you've ever seen Goodfellas, those are the guys I work with. They were all named Vinny. And we had a saying: if it fell off the truck on Tuesday, we were wearing it on Wednesday. So it was a kind of interesting place to work. But I got another job there, a managerial job there, and we had to go into the city from Queens, from JFK Airport to Manhattan once a week for meetings. But there was a lot of time to kill between the time I left work and the time I had the meetings in Manhattan. So I went back to Brooklyn College and took a night class. And that night class was called American Detective Fiction. And these are books I'd never read. And the first 3 books we read were The Continental Op by Dashiell Hammett, Farewell, My Lovely by Raymond Chandler, and The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett. And when I was done with those 3 books, I came, and this is the God's honest truth, and I'll get my wife in here to swear that this is true. I came home that night and said, you know, all that poetry training I had, it's because of this. So I want to quit my job, which was a good paying job. And I got to go to Europe a lot for free.
Okay.
And I want to write crime novels. And she said yes. She said yes twice to me in her life and has deeply regretted it both times.
Yes, well, that's a great wife to let you, because you know.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, she, you know, we've been married 42 years, and as she says, if she had committed double homicide, she'd be out by now. Yeah, she, you know, I'll tell you what she said. She said something that I've never forgotten, is that she said, I don't want you to be 55 and say I should have, or I wish I had. And, you know, you got to give a lot of credit to somebody like that, although I'm way older than 55, but I've never looked back with any regrets that I've done this.
Well, and you've obviously been successful, but I'm sure you weren't successful at first. It took some time, I'm sure. Get that first publishing contract, get an agent, all those things.
The first long piece of fiction I ever wrote was published as my first novel. So I got very lucky.
Wow.
Although I can't even look at the book anymore, because I actually had no idea how to write prose, right? I had no idea how to write it. So I always think my first series, my first 3 books, the Dylan Klein series, are me teaching me how to write a novel, how to write a crime novel. And by the 3rd one in the series, called They Don't Play Stickball in Milwaukee, I felt, okay, I think I know how to write a crime novel. And my 4th novel, which is the first of the Mo Prager novels, was reviewed in the New York Times. So, you know,
wow.
Yeah.
And about what year was that?
2001. Just before 9/11.
Just before 9/11.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, almost bad timing, huh?
Well, it wasn't, you know, right. You know, it actually got reviewed in the New York Times is a big deal.
Yeah.
But just to let you know, then and any viewers know that if you think it's so glorious doing what we do, I heard the review of that book. My oldest brother, read me the review from the Times while I was sitting in the front seat of a home heating oil delivery truck, because that's what I needed to do to make cash. Yeah. So the glorious life of an author, you know.
Yeah. So you were still having to work to.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My first contracts were kind of a joke. I mean, you know, I'll tell you, my first contract was $1,000 a book.
Yeah.
I make much more than that now, but, you know, for years, and I was, you know, happy to do it, because getting published was what that's the thing for me, was getting published. I thought the money would come later, and it did, but it came much later.
Well, I often tell people who want to write, I say, do it because you love it and you have a passion for it, but don't think you're going to get rich at it, especially at first, because very few do it right away. Some are very lucky, you know, it happens, but.
Yeah, I used to tell my writing students, if you're doing this so that to have people throw roses at your feet, go work for a florist, because you'll make more money doing that. Yeah, this is not for the faint of heart. But I think whoever does whatever career they have, they always say this is not for the faint of heart. But if you don't like rejection, and if you need a lot of positive reinforcement, this is not the career for you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, I deal with rejection better with my books than I did with women before I got married. So,
yeah. I women still come up to me and reject me, even though I haven't asked them anything.
So you mentioned a few authors that you first read there that inspired you, or obviously Raymond
Yeah.
Chandler and
Right.
Dashiell Hammett. Are there others that
Oh,
you like
sure.
to read and still read today?
Yeah, well, Lawrence Block was a big inspiration to me. Philip Kerr, the late Philip Kerr, who wrote the Bernie Gunther series, and if it's still my favorite series of all time. Really, and I met him a few times. He was a nice guy, really one of the smartest people I've ever met. Unfortunately, passed away a few years ago from cancer. Yeah, I mean, I have my favorites. I love Michael Connelly. I
Oh, yeah.
love S.J. Roseanne. I love Megan.
I got lots of books back here on my
Yeah,
shelf. I got a lot of
right.
Connollys and
Yeah,
Childs and
yeah,
Parker, and I mean all those are
yeah.
mine.
You know that Parker guy. You know
Yeah,
who? Yeah,
you called him Bob at Bauschicon, so
yeah.
you get
Bob.
away with calling him
We're
Bob.
allowed. Those of us who write his book, who write or wrote his books, we're allowed to call him Bob. So.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is I actually met Bob Parker once at a bookstore, and that no longer exists in Cambridge, Massachusetts, called Kate's Mystery Books. She used to throw a big Christmas party or a holiday party and invite all of the New England and New York writers up for the party. And one year, Bob Parker was there. And he was just as you would expect him, had a glass of scotch in his hand and a twinkle in his eye. And he was really nice to me, even though I was a complete nobody. He's a lovely guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have loved to have met him. I know I started reading all of his books, and that always inspired me. The Spencer series, and obviously you did the Jesse Stone series, which we might talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But yeah, those books were a big inspiration for me, and I read. I mean, I read all the Michael Connelly stuff now too, which I can never get in. And I know he's going to be at Bouchercon next year, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to go.
Oh, well, yeah, it's in New Orleans, which is motivation enough to go.
Well, it should be, yes.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, Michael's a very nice man.
Yeah.
He's very nice. He's actually, this will tell you all you need to know about Michael Connelly. At one point, we were on tour for our books, and he was going to do Poison Pen in Scottsdale, Arizona, the day after me. And he called me up and he said, "Why don't we do this together?" Oh. Like Michael Connelly needs to get my fans, right? But he is a nice, generous, he's always been lovely and generous to me. I think like him and Lee Child, another really nice guy, I think all these people kind of feel sorry for me because whenever we were together, my name is Coleman, right? So I was always stuck with between Michael Connelly, Harlan Coben, Lee Child, John Connelly. I think they just, let's give Reed a break.
Well, you're part of the fraternity of those with C, right? And
yes.
Yeah. So that's great. So tell us a little about your new series, your Nick Ryan series. This one, I was reading a little bit about it, and I haven't had a chance to read the book. I'm too busy writing books to read these days.
Oh, I know the feeling.
But yeah. It was very interesting reading what the story's about and the type of copy was and yes. what he does. And book one was what? Sleepless in the City?
Sleepless City.
Yeah. Not Sleepless in Seattle, but Sleepless in the City.
No, not Sleepless. This is far from being Sleepless in Seattle.
Yeah.
And the one that came out in August is called Blind to Midnight. Yep, there we go. And that's me on the cover with a toupee.
That was your younger self, right?
Yeah, very much younger self. No. The most frequently asked questions I get at book signings are, "Do you have this guy's number?"
Are these women that want the number,
yes,
or there's some
women
men
and men? I mean, he's a good-looking guy. No. So most of my protagonists before Nick have been what I call stumblers. People who were competent at their jobs, usually a uniformed cop or an insurance investigator. And then when they would rise to the level of where they had to become a detective, a private detective, they had no experience at it. And so they would fumble and stumble, and that's easy to write because those characters always put themselves in bad positions. And what's fun to write? Putting your character in dangerous and positions in which he or she are over their heads. Nick Ryan, on the other hand, is an uber competent undercover New York City detective who had done 2 tours in Afghanistan and came back home from the war, not with PTSD, but with a very different view of right, wrong, and justice. And because of that, he's approached by someone who he calls Joe. Joe is his handler, and Joe works at the behest of rich, powerful people in the city, and they offer Nick the job of being the city's, what I like to think of, the shadow watchman for New York City, who is told, here's a mess, you fix it, and you fix it however you want. Now, no one can know it, but in these 2 books, Nick has saved New York City from a lot of grief, but no one except Joe and the people and Nick doesn't know who these people are who've offered him the job, but when they approach him, they say, look, you've been a great detective. You've put major drug dealers, major mafia figures away, but how much has crime changed? Not much. Here's a chance to really make a difference in the city. And of course, being the dutiful, loyal cop that he is, he takes the job.
So he's still a police officer that works for the New York, but he's doing this stuff kind of outside the boundaries of his.
Right. Yeah. But everyone else thinks he's just an undercover detective who gets the bump to first grade detective, but his real job is in the shadows. His real job, as Joe says to him, the messes are the city's, the solutions are yours.
Wow. So is he kind of his lone self doing all this, or does he bring people in to assist him? And
yeah, he has a friend named Lenny Feld who was himself the victim of a horrible crime. He was scarred in a fire, and his whole family murdered. And Nick happened to be the person who pulled him out of the fire. So Lenny and Nick are tied together. Now, Lenny is he's kind of a tech genius, Lenny. He holds patents in data manipulation. And he's a lonely, sad man who lives in the basement of a synagogue. And he helps Nick, though he's never quite sure what Nick is doing. He helps Nick with the technical aspects of what he does. Yeah. If he needs to read, download information from a cell phone or do facial recognition software, Lenny is the guy he goes to.
We almost need that these days with all the technology and everything that everybody's using.
And it's kind of silly to have your detective be that knowledgeable about it.
Right.
I mean, he's even James Bond needed Q.
That's right.
Right. So yeah, the gadgets were Q's, but James Bond used them. And Nick has been described as a kind of urban James Bond.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So are you the next book that you said you're working on now, is this book 3 in that series, or is it something else?
This is standalone.
Standalone.
Yes, it's a standalone novel about a writer, something I know something about, who, when he was a teenager, witnessed a murder that he's never written about. It's very meta, because here I am being that guy, but I'm writing a book about a guy who witnessed the murder. And it was interesting, because I thought you'd think it would be easy for me to write that. But in fact, it was difficult in the beginning, because I had to figure out how to separate what happened to me and what I witnessed from my character, what he's witnessed, what happened to him. So that, it's funny. People say write what you know, but sometimes if what you know is too close, it's not easy to write about.
So it's not autobiographical in this aspect. It's fictionalized, but it's kind of from an experience you had.
It's somewhat autobiographical, but it isn't autobiography. No.
Yeah, and we'll let everyone know a little bit of an internet issue at times. He's having some fun with his
I'm sorry
internet
about
provider.
That,
Oh, that's okay. When you do technology, if it works, it works, and if it doesn't work, you just kind of keep plugging along. I mean,
just blame it on the Russians. It's that they're interfering with our.
with the election. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff, which is not unusual. So when you first started writing, picking up technology, did you have a computer, or were your early days, were you on a typewriter? Did you handwrite?
Oh no. In fact, my wife was telling my son the other day, he and his girlfriend came. They live in Brooklyn. It's funny. My kids grew up on Long Island, and now both of them lived in Brooklyn for a long time. So my son and his girlfriend were here, and my wife was explaining about how I'd written my first 2 books on a typewriter. Mm-hmm. And I was very resistant to getting a word processor. Yeah. Forget a computer. I was resistant to getting, if you remember, word processors were these big, bulky things that use weird hard disks. Yeah. And finally I got one of those. I gave in and worked on those for a few books, and then I got a computer. Yeah. And started writing my books on a computer.
Yeah, that was one of the things. Is I was always glad I took a typing class when I was in high school. It came in very handy when it came to writing down the
road. On the home row keys.
That's right. Yeah, my speed was pretty good at one time. The hands now, the arthritis in my wrist and stuff, feel it a little bit more now. I got to step away once in a while.
Yeah, I'm a hunter and a pecker anyway. Yeah. I mean, even though I can type, by feel, I often just look,
Yeah, well, it's good. So tell us a little about your Mo Prager series. So I kind of copy this out. You've had what looks like 9 books in that series.
No, there's 9 books. Yeah, and I think the strange thing about the Mo Prager series is it was published by, over the course of its lifetime, 5 or 6 different publishers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because they kept going out of business?
Well, some went out of business. Some I lost originally the first book, Walking the Perfect Square, was published by Permanent Press. It was my first publisher, and they're a small publishing house on Long Island. Then they sold it to Viking and Plume. So I was a Viking and it was a Viking and Plume. That's 3 publishing companies. I lost my contract there after the 3rd book in the series. Then it was picked up. I'm telling you, it was all because Mo was such a popular character and the books were so well thought of, and that other publishers were always willing to pick up the series. So yeah, it was at 6 different publishers, 9 books at 6 different publishers.
And a lot of different covers, I'm assuming, because a lot of times
Yeah,
they change.
there's no, you got many different versions of, if you want to put it up again, I can tell you those are yeah. Some of these are from the same publisher, and some are reprints, and some are So yeah, there are lots of different covers.
Well, your name is bigger at the top on some, and they're very small at the bottom on others.
Yeah, the last one in the series. This is actually in reverse order of how they were written. So it starts on the bottom right. Is the first one, and the Hollow Girl on the top left is the last one.
So tell us a little bit about Mo, because it sounds like he was a fairly complicated character.
Mo, everybody had written the typical private eye, and I wasn't going to do it any better. The hard drinking, quick with a gun, white, divorced or loner, tough with his fist, that kind of character. And I wasn't going to do that any better than what had done. So I thought, let me kind of turn it, take those cliches and turn them on their ear. Mo owns wine stores with his brother. He was a New York City cop, a uniformed cop, who had the good fortune of finding a girl who'd been kidnapped. And he found her. He was a hero cop, and would have made detective. But on the day of Son of Sam's arraignment, Mo came back from extra security duty, slipped on the waxed floor, and ruined his knees and was put out to pasture. So he was retired from the police force, and always burning in his heart was that desire to be, to have gotten his gold shield. But of course, he was never going to get it because they had retired him. So he goes into the wine business with his older brother, and Mo hates it. He just hates it. But, unlike the other usual detectives, Mo isn't living from case to case. He doesn't depend on money from case to case. He's not poor. He's not rich, but he's not poor. So he's got a steady source of income. He's happily married, at least for part of the series. He's happily married. He has a kid. He has a house. He has a mortgage. He's Jewish, right? He is not anything like the typical detective that we've all read and done better than me, except he is none of those things, but he's all of those things that we expect the private eye to be. And so he's an interesting contrast, because he's both what a reader doesn't expect. He's a sensitive guy. He's tough enough, but it's not like, hitting somebody is not his first inclination. And he's a bright guy, but he's an interesting contrast from the typical detective that everybody's read. And the series takes place over the course of from the late 70s to the early 2000s.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mo ages. That's another thing. One of the things I don't like about certain series is having a main character who never gets older.
Right.
He just finishes one case, and then the next person comes into his office and he's the same age. Mo ages. Mo's life changes from book to book. It's a dynamic series in both what Mo does and who he is. And I say by the Hollow Girl, which is the last book, he's getting pretty 65 years old by the end of the series. And as he says, the only thing he could flash with any credibility is his ARP card. So I was never going to turn him into, an old man detective. He had reached, I had said everything I could say through him, and he had reached an age where it was just silly to have him, beating people up or pulling a gun,
Hits him with a cane, right?
With his cane, he wasn't going to move to Florida and find people's stolen scooters, But I think it is the most enduring series I've ever written, and people still write to me about it, and they love. Mo is me, but my oldest brother's age. So Mo is the character most like me.
And a lot of that was in the Coney Island area, right? Isn't that
Yes.
where he was?
Yeah,
Brooklyn,
that's where he actually had a house in the area where I saw that guy murdered. It's an area near Coney Island called Sheepshead Bay. It's like a little fishing village in Brooklyn. So yeah, most lives. He went to my high school. His first address in the book is my old high school girlfriend's address. So yeah, it's set in my old neighborhood pretty much.
And is that the series that you won the Shamus Awards?
I won the Shamus Awards. I've won the Shamus Awards 4 times. 3 of them were for the Mo series, and 1 of them was for the Gus Murphy series.
Right, and I have the Gus Murphy series. Looks like you just had a couple books in that
just
series.
2, yes. It's called When I Gave Up the Jesse Stone series.
Mm-hmm.
Putnam. We parted ways. So, but these 2 books were very well thought of, and Where It Hurts was nominated for an Edgar and the Thriller Award. So,
and is it another private eye or a former cop, or
he's a former cop? He is Mo inside out. Gus is not like me.
Yeah.
Gus's story is kind of one of Gus Murphy's a Suffolk County, which is where I live now, a Suffolk County cop, on the job 20 years, thinks he has the world by the tail. He's one of those guys who shovels his neighbor's driveway, when it snows, not because it's going to get him anywhere, but just because he's a nice guy. He has everything he's ever wanted. He's got his pension. He's got a lovely wife. He's got 2 kids, and he thinks he has the world by the tail. And then his son dies of an undiagnosed heart ailment, and Gus's whole world blows up.
Right.
And he's now, it's a year or 2 after his son's died. He's getting divorced, as often happens when there's this type of tragedy. He's kind of alienated from his daughter, and he's now driving the shuttle bus for a small for a hotel near Long Island MacArthur Airport, just to have something to do,
right.
Because to deal with his grief. And then he's approached by people, who knew him when he was a cop to help them out. He's not an official private eye, but he's kind of an unofficial private eye.
Yeah, so that's his way, I guess, to maybe take his mind off of the issues and stuff.
As he says, there's no one for him. His son died. There's no one for him to see about that. There's no why, right? He's a cop. Cops always want to know why.
Right.
There's no why with his son. So if he can help other people and find out why the bad things happen to them, he feels he's in some ways he's never going to find the answer about his son's death,
right?
But he can help other people find the why. of the bad things that have happened to them.
Yeah, that's it. That's interesting because yes, that's a great point. That there's tragedy in your life, and usually that tragedy, someone caused that tragedy. But in this case, it's just was
A
life.
drunk driver,
Yeah.
a nut with a gun,
Right.
that there's a why. When it's an undiagnosed heart ailment, who's he going to see? Who can he be mad at? Who's going to give him an answer? So he's looking for answers for other people in the hopes that it'll assuage his grief.
Yeah, those sound very interesting. So you did just 2 books in that series, or
Yeah, I have written a third one.
Mhm.
During the pandemic, I had a lot of writing time and wrote 3 or 4 books. Well, the second Nick Ryan book, and I wrote 2 standalones and a third Gus Murphy novel.
Mhm.
When they'll come out, who will publish them? They will get published,
Yeah.
but I can't. Who knows when? And the book I'm writing now, like I said, I need to write. I'm a very unhappy person when I'm not writing. So, if I have to, I'll write 20 books. I don't care.
Right.
If and when they get published, that's a different issue. For me, I'm a writer, so I write.
So have you ever thought of self-publishing any of those? I know you're traditionally published.
I might. I generally will find a publisher to traditionally publish it. I have no doubt. I have a very good agent, so I have no doubt that I will.
Right.
But I wouldn't. When I started out, self-publishing was very much frowned upon.
Yes.
It's not. I know you self-publish, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not frowned upon the same way anymore. And I have to say, I did self-publish a book of poetry and short story, because when you write short stories, you get the rights back after a year or two. So what are people going to buy every anthology I've written a short story in? So what I did is I self-published something called the Short Stack, which has many of my short stories and my poetry in them. So yeah, I've done some self-publishing, because who else was going to publish that?
Well, yeah, and there's many self-published authors that have done really well. I've done okay. But I know there's some authors that I know that have sold over 1 million books, ebooks at least, and stuff, and do very well with it. But yeah, there's not the stigma to it anymore. But you do have to be careful to make sure you've got good covers and you've got good editing done and good formatting. And there's still a lot of them out there that you open up the ebook and the formatting's all over them.
I think what I'm interested in about is self-publishing is there's 200,000 people who self-publish or more. How does somebody find you? You know what I mean? So if I self-publish, I have a readership. That doesn't mean I'm going to sell many, but I have a readership and I have ways to reach people. I always think it's interesting when you first take that step, the belief that somehow people are going to find you. Now you're obviously doing okay at it. And good for you, good for you. But that's always always that question. So let me ask you, how did you get noticed?
It just took time. You do ads, and for me, I do a lot of events, craft fairs and stuff, and sell books there. That's where I do most of my sales, and then word of mouth. But it took a while. I have 14 books, but the first 2 or 3, everyone said, write that first book. And then, well, you need a second book now to go with that first book, because, and then go. And so it's a lot. And like you said, to stand out in a crowd of so many other people that are publishing stuff, and there's a lot of great stuff out there and there's a lot of bad stuff out there. And it goes against my nature, because I'm not the most overtly, hey, look at me type of person, like a lot of authors, we're a little more withdrawn. I'm good one-on-one, but to go out there and throw yourself out there.
Yeah, I'm good in a crowd, but I hate patting myself on the back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
And you have to do a lot of that if you're self-published. You have to, like I see ads on Facebook for people who self-publish. The next Jack Reacher. If you love Jack Reacher, come on. I always wonder what I have to add. The next time I see Lee, I've got to ask him what he thinks when he sees that. Better than Jack Reacher.
Well, and people they did that with your books too. So probably some of them said, this is Mo Prager, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I just think that part is a part, because you have to dedicate a lot of time away from the writing to the selling.
Yeah.
So I find that I kind of admire people who do it, because I have a close friend who does it, who's on New York radio. He's on one of the most listened to radio stations in the country, and he does it. And it's not easy for him to sell tons of books, even though he's got a great platform for it. So I always think it's a tough row to hoe, but you're doing it, so good for you.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and you have to spend a lot of time, or you pay people to do some of that stuff too, and it's all coming out of your pocket. And I know you mentioned.
I pay my own. Not only do I have the publishing company's publicist, but I also pay for a private publicist and a webmistress. Some people who do that stuff for me. By the way, I like that T-shirt.
That's my Private Eye series, Jarvis Man. Like you're talking about, he's kind of your classic hard-boiled private eye, and you can't really break that mold too much. He's, that's kind of what people like, and you try to find some little tweaks, maybe, or a little bit different. My private eye. Some people said well, he's kind of dumb. He makes a lot of mistakes. I could see that coming, and I'm going, well, that's kind of the human aspect of my character.
Where he's a stumbler. He's a stumbler. You see,
he's learning on the job.
Right.
He's gotten smarter over time. But he's determined. But he screws up, and like a lot of us do.
Yeah.
So I know.
I think that makes them relatable, which is good.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what that human quality, because heaven forbid, none of us are perfect, right? We all screw up a lot of things through our lives.
Some of us. If I only had my hair,
So I took this picture at BoucherCon on the panel there, and we talked a little bit before we brought on the show that you seem to do this panel every year, but there's a lot of authors here who are covering for or taking over series for authors who've passed away, or in Andrew Child's place, he's taking over for his brother. And you took over for the Jesse Stone series, I believe, after Michael Brandman.
Michael Brandman, who's a very nice man, who's a really nice guy. Yeah, I took over for Michael Brandman.
Because he had done the series. He was the movie director or producer, right?
That's right.
Jesse Stone.
He's friends with Tom Selleck, and they had done I think 3 or 4 Jesse Stone movies, and it was too much. He wasn't at the time a real novelist. He was a screenwriter, and I think it was a mutual parting of the ways. And by the way, he's a very nice man. Whenever I'm in Los Angeles, we have lunch or dinner together. He's a really nice guy.
Because I think he did maybe 3
novels? I think he did 3.
Yeah.
He did 3.
And that's tough. Obviously, taking over for Robert B. Parker. I mean, that's, we're talking about one of the greats of all time. So there's a lot of pressure there, though, they did the Jesse Stone movies, were very successful. Tom Selleck, Jesse Stone. Everybody sees him as Jesse Stone, even though he's probably too old to be Jesse Stone, especially at the end there. But
don't tell him that.
Yeah, Tom. So, but it was interesting listening to that panel talking about authors who took over, and some of them had positive experiences, and there was one gentleman who did not have as good an experience.
Brian
just Wood.
Quatermass. Brian Quatermass.
Yeah.
He took over for Stuart Wood.
Yes.
Yeah. Not. Yeah. See, the thing is, I had Bob's editor to guide me.
Yeah.
And I listened to her guidance. She'd been Bob's editor for 20 years, so she knew the series inside out. She, and I would say, I want to do this or I want to do that, and she would say, well, you can do this, but don't do that. I would run ideas past her because she would know how far you can push things. And mostly it's a positive experience. Like Brian is the only guy I know that had a right from the get-go a bad experience because he wanted to reinvent the wheel, and that's you always get in trouble when you try to reinvent the wheel, because the wheel, the series was pretty successful before I took it over. So and that was interesting. I said yes without thinking about it. I said yeah. Oh, absolutely. A chance to write, a Robert B. Parker series. And then I realized, holy shit, I have to actually write this.
Yes.
How am I going to do it? And I'm sure you've heard the story is I spoke to 3 people when I was offered the job. Ace Atkins, a close friend who wrote the Spencer novels after Bob died. S.J. Roseanne, who was kind of my mentor in the mystery community, and my close friend Tom Schreck. And Tom is a an upstate New York writer, a boxer. He's also a New York State Athletic Commission boxing judge. Interesting guy. And he loved Parker, and he was a big Jesse. I'm back.
Yes,
he's a big Jesse Stone fan. And I was speaking to him, and I asked him, Tom, what do you think? And he said something completely out of left field to me, but which made my mind up for me. He said, Reed, I love Elvis Presley. And I said, Tom, what does loving Elvis Presley have to do with how I'm going to write Jesse Stone? And he said, listen, I've seen the best Elvis impersonators there are. And no matter how good they are, there's 2 things you can never escape. One, they're not Elvis. They're an impersonator. And 2, they can never do anything new. Their repertoire is Elvis's repertoire. So they can't ever introduce a new song. They can't act in any way different than Elvis. And when he said that to me, and it was the best advice I got, I realized I'm going to be faithful to the characters, but I'm not going to try and imitate Bob's writing because it would always be seen as me impersonating Elvis. Right. I would always be seen as an imitator. So while Jesse acts as Jesse always acted when Bob and Michael wrote him, I didn't write them in it. My writing voice was never their writing voice. And the books all made the bestseller list. So I must have done something right.
Yeah. And fans, they sit there and say that, they want it to be Robert B. Parker, but there's only one Robert B. Parker. Everybody's got their own. Yeah. They're all, and you're going to write the way you want to write it. Yeah. The character is going to follow a certain, Jesse Stone, he's got Jen, who's, screwing up his head all the time, his ex-girlfriend, wife, whatever she was.
I have a funny story about that because when I wrote those books, the first book, Blind Spot, and I toured the book, the most frequently asked question was, can you please kill Jen off? She is by far the most annoying character in all of crime fiction. And Bob, what's weird about Bob is if and I had to read all those books, go back and read them all.
Sure.
he would be building momentum and then kill the momentum in the book by reintroducing her into the book.
Yeah.
So it was like, Bob was an interesting guy in that in Spencer, Susan Silverman, Spencer's girlfriend, was the reflection of Bob's wife when he loved her.
Right.
And Jen was the reflection of Bob's wife when he wasn't getting along with her. So you got both aspects of his wife in the two different characters. So I couldn't kill her, but I could marry her off.
Yeah, marry her off. Well, there's a lot of people didn't like Susan either. So a lot of people were like, everyone said, Hawk should just take Susan and run away with her, right? I've heard several people write that sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. So that series is going on, and what Mike Lupica, I think, is taking over all of them.
Yeah, now he's going to get replaced because I think he's moved over to Spencer, and he's writing with James Patterson. So I don't think he has time to do.
James is writing with everybody these days. Every book
except
I ever
me and you. Except me and
not
you.
yet, but I'm on his speed dial, I think. Well, we'll see.
I'm friends with 5 or 6 of his co-writers. So,
well, Bill Clinton can take his call, right? I mean, what was Bill ever written in his life, right? So, so I love when you were. I was watching one of the other events, and I think, or one of the panels at BoucherCon, but I think it was the Private Eyes one, and talking about pantsters and plotters, and I loved your response. You can do what you did, but you were just like,
outlines, feh. And here's a funny thing, is I would never tell anybody you should write how I write.
Yeah.
But for me, the thought of doing an outline is an anathema to me, because once you write an outline, you've written the book. Why would I want to write it again?
Mm-hmm.
And my theory has always been, if I'm kind of surprised by what comes next, if I'm not sure where I'm going, then the readers will be surprised by what comes next. To me, outlines for me, an outline would just get in the way. And I have no interest in ever doing an outline. And my mind is kind of organized, at least up until this point in my life, so that I can keep track of what's happened in the past in the book and what's going to happen in the future. I really, I'm not a big fan of outlines.
Well, and I'm not either. I tried to outline when I first started writing, and it just didn't work for me. I'm completely a pantster, and I always have just a basic idea. Sometimes I might have a title, the storyline idea to start with, and I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I feel like the characters are there sitting on my shoulder, behind me, whispering in my ear, going, "No, I need to do this or that."
It's funny because readers, when you say stuff like that, they think you're full of it. And the fact is that there are some characters who will not let go, who, you want to write them out and they won't be written out. Yeah. And I always use, in my Mo Prager series, I had a character in the second book, Redemption Street, a Holocaust survivor named Israel Roth. And basically his function in the book, which takes place in the Catskills, New York Catskills, is to basically do backstory. So I thought, okay, he's a nice old guy who's a Holocaust survivor, and he's great for this book. Guess what? And he's either in person or in spirit 8 of the 9 Mo books, because he was going to be in these books whether I liked it or not. And finally, I just said, okay, he's going to be in the book. He's never going away. So, there are characters who are too good to let go, and they tell you, I'm too good to let go of.
So do you ever feel like you write yourself into a corner and have to write yourself out, or do you enjoy sometimes doing that to yourself?
It's funny because I describe my first, like I said, my first 3 books in the Dylan Klein series, Life Goes Sleeping, Little Easter, and They Don't Play Stickball in Milwaukee, was me teaching myself how to write a detective novel. Because I'd read them, but I didn't know how to write them. Mm-hmm. So I always say that the first 2 books were not me trying to write the great American novel, but me trying to write the great American sentence, every sentence. So, there's a lot of overwriting in the first 2 books. And the other thing was the painting myself in a corner, mm-hmm. right? So have you ever heard of the Winchester House?
I don't think I have.
Yes. So the Winchester rifle fortune, the daughter who inherited the Winchester rifle fortune, I think it's in San Jose, built a house, and she was a little crazy. She thought if she ever stopped building the house, she would die. So every day she lived in that house, there were workmen building the house, more house. So I always felt in my first 2 books that when I painted myself in a corner, I just built more house. I just made more plot. Okay, well, now we're going to use this part of the plot. So obviously my first 2 books are kind of plotted like bizarrely. And then I realized it's okay, Reed. You can back out of the corner and delete some of that stuff and rewrite it. Right. But my first 2 books, I just built more house.
Just getting deeper and deeper in trouble, right?
Right, yeah. And then you find ways out of it. And I eventually did, but I also learned my lesson that way.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's kind of fun to write yourself in a corner, and then you go, okay, all right, let me see if I can figure my way out of this mess or not. But like you said, sometimes you got to go backwards and go, I got to.
Maybe not this time.
This time, there's only so much we can do. So you did mention you pretty much write every day. It sounds like you said you if you don't write, you feel like it.
Well, yeah, this summer I took the most time off I'd ever taken off in 30 years from writing. Yeah. The weather in New York this summer was great. I mean, and unfortunately, we're in the middle of a drought. So I was working out a lot, playing a lot of golf and a lot of pickleball to be occupied. But the fact is that I cannot help myself. No matter how hard I try, I wind up back having to write every day. Now, that doesn't mean I have friends who have an X amount of words or X amount of pages. I don't need to do that. I write every day, so it'll produce. If you write a page a day for a year, it's a 365-page book.
Yeah.
Right. So I never worry about. I never set daily goals. And in a few months I'll have a 300-page book. That's just the way it works. But I do it every day. I'm back to doing it every day, and I kind of feel I'm losing my center if I'm not writing, because it's who I am.
Yeah. When you travel too, do you
write? I do. My wife and I, we were supposed to go to Spain before the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened.
Yeah. Didn't go anywhere.
And then my daughter got married and had now I have a granddaughter, and they live near here. So there was, the pandemic, then my grandchild, and then it's like, okay, we still have to go. So for my wife's birthday this year, I surprised her and said, we're going to Spain. So we went to Spain for a week. And, I saw you at BoucherCon. Mm-hmm. So I went to BoucherCon. I went to a smaller convention called C3 in Columbia, Maryland. I might go to Left Coast Crime. I'm going to a library thing in Florida. I think book touring is becoming a thing of the past.
Yes.
It's not economically feasible even for big publishing houses. It's just not feasible.
And I think Left Coast Crime is going to be in Denver this year, this next year, if I remember right.
Is it?
I think so, yeah. And so since I live here,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to try to get down there and go to that.
Do you know a writer named Mark Stevens?
Mark Stevens. Well, that sounds familiar
Tall,
to me.
very tall guy, kind of long hair. He lives in Denver. He's a writer friend of mine. Yeah. I might go to Left Coast. I like Left Coast Crime. The smaller I like it because it's big enough that a lot of people I know are there, and it's well, populated, but it's not gigantic like BoucherCon. This year's BoucherCon was kind of a disaster.
Oh, it was
because of where it was. Not the convention itself, but where it was. It was
a lot of walking.
Yeah,
two floors and two little elevators to get up and down.
Yeah, I mean, it was like existing in a Stephen King novel, that place. And given the age of most of the attendees, it was a bit bad choice.
Oh, I was exhausted. By Saturday, I was exhausted. And we were leaving town because we had driven, because I do Killer Nashville as well each year, which was the week before that one. So I know Clay Stafford really well, and I do that event as well.
Here's something you didn't know. That I was executive vice president of Mystery Writers of America.
Yeah.
I got Clay the seed money to start Killer Nashville.
Really? All right. Well, I'll have to bring that up to Clay because I'm going to interview him in a few
I was at the first Killer Nashville. I still have my Killer Nashville coffee cup from the first Killer Nashville.
Yeah, but I think this was year 16 or 17 or whatever. So yeah. Well, I'll have to bring that up when I talk to him here. It probably will be in January sometime.
Yes.
But, yeah.
Well, we've been doing this a long time. It flew by. It's flew by.
I know. Yeah. We're at about an hour and 12 minutes. So I always ask everybody, my name of my show is Bringing Life to Characters. What do you look for and bring your characters to life in your stories? What is it that you think?
That's an easy answer for me.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a minor character in my books.
Mm-hmm.
That in my books, in my head, even if a character is on the page for a paragraph, in my head, that character has a full emotional life. And if you write your characters as if they're stick figures, they will seem like stick figures on the page. And no one that I write ever seems like a stick figure. No one will ever, in my books, walk on stage and say, "Hark, I hear the cannons roar," just so you know there's a war going on. I sum it up best this way. When you were out on the street today, I imagine you were outside today sometime, and you pass somebody walking their dog, right? They may have noticed you and you may have noticed them. They're a minor character in your life, a very minor character. And you are a very minor character in their lives. But that doesn't mean that person walking the dog doesn't have a full emotional life. And you certainly have a full emotional life. So I always keep that in mind when I write my characters, that even people you pass on the street, people you're on the subway with, people you drive by in a car, if you look at somebody next to you at a stoplight, just because they're in your life for 5 seconds, they have a full life. So I always keep that in mind when I write my characters. And as long as you do that, you will always write full characters.
So that reminds me of the line Michael Connelly uses in the Boss series a lot. Everybody counts or nobody counts.
Nobody counts, right?
That's right.
That's right. And so that's how I've always thought of character. Is there's no such thing as a minor character.
So do you have any advice for aspiring authors? Oh, we froze again.
Don't do it. My advice to aspiring writers: don't do it.
Yeah.
No, it's very simple. It's the work. Like, I understand that you have to focus because of how you publish on the sales and selling, but most of your energy should be focused on writing the best book you can write, which means sitting your tush down every day and writing, because there is no such thing as wasted writing. That doesn't mean you're not going to have bad days, but after I feel qualified to say this after how many books I've written and how many I've published. At the end of a book, you will never know which part you wrote on a bad day and which part you wrote on a good day. So if you get in the habit of writing every day, you'll learn that the good days and the bad days, you will still produce good work.
Great. I agree with you. Though I'm not as disciplined writing every day. I go in big streaks. I can sit down and write 30,000 words in like a couple weeks, and then bang, then I'm drained, and then I have to stop for a little while and then recharge.
I always say this.
I do the work, is definitely.
Yeah, dude, it's the work. I don't care how you do the work. I don't care if you outline. I don't care if you don't outline. I don't care if you write from the end backwards, right? But you have to do the work. And that is the most, and I think a lot of people, how many people have said to you, boy, I've always wanted to write a book?
Oh yeah.
Here's the funny thing about this. If you want to be an electrician, somebody has to certify you. If you want to be a college professor, somebody has to certify you. No one has to certify you to write a book. All you have to do is sit your ass down and write it. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I know I get some people say I've been writing a book for 10 years. It's like every day.
Yeah, that must be a hell of a long book. Yeah.
It's a heck of a long book. Yeah. Let's take up their whole office.
Right.
All right. So this is your website
for
people to find you. And
I'm on Facebook. I'm on X also and Instagram, but that's not me. That's my publicist who does that. So if you write to me, I will always write back. I never ignore anybody who writes to me. You can find me on Facebook. If you're a writer, here's the one thing, I'll friend you. Here's the one thing I won't do. If the only thing you post about is your books, I won't friend you because it bores no one sees it anymore.
Right.
So if you notice, if you ever look at my posts, I have this get off my lawn thing.
Yes.
That makes me interesting. That's a brand, right? So that when I post about my books, people pay attention. But if only thing I ever post about is books, no one pays attention. So, I'm happy to friend any other writer, but not if you only post about your books.
Yeah, that's great. And events, you're going to planning on going to BoucherCon next year in New Orleans.
I will be at BoucherCon. I'm going to the Southwest Florida Library Readers thing on March 1st in Fort Myers, Florida. I might go to Left Coast Crime. One never knows.
Well, I say I'm pretty sure it's in Denver this year. So if so, maybe I'll get a chance to see you there.
That'd be great. We'll have a drink together.
Yeah, I would enjoy that. If not, I'm going to try to get to BoucherCon in New Orleans. I mean, I gotta have the money to do it too. So
that is, yeah. There's that.
There's that money, little money thing there.
That money thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you very much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
No, I appreciate you coming on. I enjoyed talking with you, and hopefully we'll get to see you down the road. And I hope everybody out there who's watching will check out your books and get that next.
I hope so too. I need that money to go to New Orleans.
That's right. Yeah.
Take care, man.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Reed.
Do me a favor, send me the link to this on.
I will. I'll send you a link to it. Yep. I'll send you the link to the YouTube page, and I can even send you the file if you want to have it put on your website by your
Oh, that'd
website.
be great. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You take care of yourself.
Yeah, you do the same.
All right. Take care, man. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Well, that was a fun interview with Reed there. He's always interesting to listen and talk to and stuff. So we'll wrap things up. Let everyone know I'm going to be at Columbine High School on Saturday doing a craft fair there, and we'll be selling books. And then the weekend after that will be Molly McGee's. And then my next guest will be in 2 weeks, the 19th, and I'm going to have Helen Starbuck, Pat Paisley. I always mess up these names. I don't know why. But anyway, I will be there talking with her, and she's a local author living here in Colorado as well. We'll be talking about her books. So thanks, everyone. Take care, and we will see you all in a couple weeks.